So this week, you get to have some fun writing research questions. And so I want to go ahead and from the beginning take some pressure off. You are not going to get these right the first time. Your grade this week is not based on having perfect research questions. What I am wanting out of this, the purpose of this section, is to have you start thinking about what research questions are, what they do for your study, and how to write one. So you're going to draft some and turn them in so that I can start giving you feedback on those research questions. This is also an awesome opportunity to start talking with your advisor dissertation chair, if that person has been identified, to start drafting these questions, because they are going to go through several iterations before they go into your dissertation. This is first draft, and so don't feel a lot of pressure to get them perfect. Just start getting words on the page. That's what this week is for. Now, there are some basic guidelines, so I don't want just crazy mess, but we do need to have the guidelines followed, but you will do really well once we get feedback, and we may rewrite, redraft, rewrite these a couple of times and narrow the focus a little bit. So let's start looking at research questions. And so the first thing is, what is a research question? So it's a question that's going to guide your research, right? And so there are typically more than one research question in a study the size of the dissertation. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But a research question is something that you're going to do research to answer. So one thing that you need to do, and it's important because all of you guys have taken the well, most of you had the Lit Review course, and so you've written a literature review, and so you've started focusing in on what the area that you think you might want to research, and so you know some things that are happening in that area because you read at least 60 articles when you went through that course. And so what you don't want to do is replicate something that's already been done. However, you can replicate pieces of that because you're working to do research in a body, to build a body of knowledge. And so if somebody in, for example, Kansas did a study in a K-12 school, well, you may want to do a very similar study in Tennessee or in Texas to see if you get the same results that they got. Because just one study doesn't make something true, right? Just because it happened in one place doesn't mean that's generalizable to the rest of the population. And so sometimes you may have the same research questions that someone else had, but your setting is different. And so you want to say, okay, well, this worked for this school in Kansas. Is it going to work here with this population in Tennessee? And so I'm not saying just because someone has done something and you want to replicate the study that's not valuable. In fact, that's very valuable. And so there's lots of different ways to go about it. But basically, these are the questions that you want to ask that you're going to answer with your research study. And so how many is too many? How many questions should you have? 1 to 3. If you have more than that, you're crazy because you have to answer every question that you write. If you get research questions approved by your committee and you are going gangbusters and you get 5 questions approved, guess what? You're going to answer all 5 questions or you're not going to successfully defend your dissertation. So this is me talking, and I am not any one of your chairs, so this is always, you have to confirm things with your chair. I strongly encourage you, though, to not have more than 3 questions. You may have 5 or 6 questions that you want to answer, and that's great. You can have a follow-up study, you can have a second study, but for the purpose of this project, this dissertation, you need to keep it narrow, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So 1 to 3 questions, and typically people will have 2 or 3 research questions that they want to answer. So here are some tips from the Writing Center at Vanderbilt, and they wrote these for thesis and dissertation. So these tips aren't just for dissertation, but they're so valuable. And so one thing is, are your research questions, or is my research question something that you're curious about and that others might care about? It has to be, a so what factor. Somebody needs to, this needs to be work that someone else might want to read, or that could impact a school or a hospital, what you know about a subject. But plus, you're going to be working on this for a year, right? And so it needs to be something that you're interested in. Now, I will tell you my situation was a little bit different. What I did my dissertation research on may not have been the thing that I thought I would be most passionate about, but there was a great opportunity, and I was invited to come in and do some work at a school and was told that I could also, do research there. So it was a really great opportunity for me. And so make sure that it's, something that you do, but I did care about the topic, but it just happened that there was the opportunity. So think about what you have an opportunity to study, and also you have to be somewhat interested in it, because you're going to spend so many hours on this, time away from family and friends, all of those things, time giving up some of your other activities, and so it needs to be something that you do have some interest in. And then this is kind of what I mentioned earlier. Does it put a spin on an old issue, or is it trying to solve a problem? What are you wanting to do with your research? And this will help you to write those questions. And so are you replicating something? Are you trying to say, this is something that's happening in California and I want to see, does it work here? That's putting, a spin on an old issue or something that's already been done. Think about what it is that you're trying to do. And then too broad, too narrow, or okay. Remember that you have a finite amount of time for this. This is not a study that's going to go on for years. We want you guys to graduate, and so you need to pick questions that that you can answer, but you don't want to be so specific that there's no room to interpret things or to learn new things from your data, but it also can't be too broad that you never can get to that final answer. And so then, is your research question researchable within the time frame of the assignment? So you might want to know, for example, how something impacts student learning. Well, if the students aren't taking that course until next fall, or covering those concepts in a K-12 classroom in the fall, but you need to collect data in the spring, you don't want to have to wait an additional fall to get your data collected. So make sure that you choose questions with answer that can be answered within your time frame for graduation, and given the resources available at your location. Don't say you want to do something nationwide if you don't have the time or money to do a nationwide survey. So think about those types of things, and that goes hand in hand with, is it measurable? What kind of information do you need? And so a lot of times people really want to focus on student achievement, whether it's in higher ed or in K-12. But if your school district that you want to study is not going to give you access to student test scores, then you're not going to be able to do that study. You need to be realistic when you're thinking about things. If you want to know about a policy in a corporate office, and you're going to answer these questions about policy, well, you need to check with someone in HR to make sure that you're going to have access to the data that you need. And then that goes into this next point: what sources will have the type of information that you need? So start thinking, can you get things by looking in journals and books? But you're going to have to probably do interviews or surveys with people. This is not just something that you can go out and get information by looking at a book. You're going to need to conduct research, because again, this was written for people also writing thesis or really thorough reviews of literature, but we're doing a research project, and so you're going to need to have data from people, or surveys, interviews, those types of things. Okay, so some things to remember. This one, it doesn't bother me so much, but the majority of people on committees I've served with hate research questions that could be answered with a yes or no. Do tablets increase test scores? Yes. Well, then, but you need to ask something else, like to what degree do tablets increase test scores? Something, that's just an example, but make sure that your research questions can't just be answered with yes or no. Again, that kind of thing doesn't necessarily bother me, but I've seen in countless times, I've never seen anybody make it through proposal without someone having them change the wording on the research question so that it's not a yes or no answer. So go ahead and put thought into that before you start. Research questions can be changed until prospectus. You're going to draft these things over and over and over until you get them right. And then once you go into prospectus, you might get feedback. Prospectus is another word for proposal, if I haven't mentioned that. Proposal and prospectus are the same thing. So when you go into prospectus and your committee approves your proposal, before they approve it, they might have you change or tweak a research question or delete one or add one, any of that. But once they have signed off on your proposal, you cannot change your research questions. Once your committee and IRB has approved it, you cannot change it without going back to them and getting reapproved. Because it changes your study. It changes what they approved for you to do. So you need to keep that in mind. After they've approved it, that's what it is. And that's so important not to have 10 research questions, because if they approve 10, then guess what? You're answering all 10. Okay, so then the research questions are the basis for alignment for your lit review, your data collection, and data analysis. So again, if you write these 3 questions, you're going to need to build some information in your literature about whatever the questions are. Your data collection and data analysis have to answer your research question. So for example, if you say, if your research question is, do students' test scores increase with the use of something, or and to what degree do student test scores increase? And then you don't have data collected or analyzed on the test scores, you just have interviews with teachers, you're not answering those research questions. So these set the basis for the alignment all throughout. And then don't follow rabbit holes, and this is important. So once you start doing more literature, once you start doing interviews with people, once you start doing surveys, collecting data, you're going to say, oh, this is so interesting, and you realize you've spent an hour looking at something, but wait, it doesn't answer one of my research questions. Then right then, you need to stop following that lead and table it for a follow-up study. Put it in that section of the dissertation of things for future research, but this is something that's going to keep you on task to answer those questions for your study. And then one final thing that is not on here, but I need for you guys to do, is you can go to our library's website and look at other people's dissertations from any that have ever been approved in the college. You can look at just the ones from College of Ed. You can look at other universities' dissertations and look at other people's research questions. Spend some time looking at those. I can't give you specific information about research questions right now because all of you will be researching very different things. Some of you will do quantitative, some will do qualitative, some are doing mixed. You're all individuals, and so this is all general feedback, but once you start drafting those questions, I will work with you individually to give you feedback and help you craft those questions. But before you start writing, please go out and look at other people's research questions. And I wouldn't just Google this, actually go to the library's website, pull up people's dissertations and look at their research questions, or go to academic journals and look at the research questions that guided those studies. And the reason I say don't just Google it is because you're not guaranteed to get returns of things that were actually published or accepted. But if you look at published dissertations or journal articles, you will see examples of research questions there.